Hello, everyone. We had a moment of technical difficulty, but we are here, I believe, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. I'm the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she, her, and it's so great to have you here. It's a really exciting day. I'm going to bring in my colleague and co-conspirator and friend, Jean Marie Nevada. It's a big day.
It's such a big day. Do you realize we've been doing this for a year, Liz?
It's our 1-year anniversary, and we have been picked up off the bubble for a second season. Congratulations.
I didn't really want to do a second season, but I need to show you. I didn't tell you about this, but I thought if we're making it to a second season, we need some merch. So I took out my tape and everything. And
yes.
I made our Something to Talk About nonprofit version of a cup. I just pasted this to a mug. It's how we roll in nonprofits. This is how we do merch.
I love it. So we'll find out. We'll let you know where we can make that available. Jean Marie will be on vacation next week, but she'll be creating those in her living room while she's off. So see you in a little bit.
Liz didn't know I was doing that because I knew I would have been told no. So hello, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and we get together every week to talk about something. And this week we are talking about Pose. So first, if you would like to get to this week's article, which was from Variety, you should go to straightforequality.org/discussion series, and that will give you access to this week's article plus the 3 questions that we are going to talk about today. And I'm really excited this week because I get to have 2 of my colleagues from PFLAG with me for the conversation. So I'd love to bring in Diego Sanchez, who is our Director of Advocacy, Policy, and Partnerships, and Janelle Dooley, who is our Chapter Services Coordinator.
Hello, I'm back.
Season 2, here we are. We didn't know that we'd make it into a season 1, and yet we just keep going, and we're going to continue doing this until we don't need to do it anymore at whatever point that is. So,
you don't look a day over 2.
Thank you. I want to know that I looked as good as I did on the first episode, where I was also making it up like we'll do today.
You are extraordinarily radiant.
I love when you lie to me. I love it. Everybody here has been trained to lie until we get through the show so I don't collapse. So this article just fascinated me, and I have to admit, we were just talking about this. It made me sad because I'm going to miss Pose Something Fierce when it is gone. But I want to read this quote from Janet Mock that was in the article about the show. And she said, "My life has been forever changed because of Pose, a drama series that centered around trans and queer people living with HIV and AIDS, and Black and Latinx people without trepidation or apology." That without trepidation or apology was definitely my favorite part of that quote, because I think it is very true of this show. So I'd love to get started talking about this. So my first question is for you personally, and Diego and Janelle, you come from very different backgrounds, you come from different generations, and yet both have a connection to this show in different ways. What has a show like Pose meant for you? And maybe, Janelle, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Diego, and we'll keep switching around.
So this upcoming year is going to be challenging. I feel like all of my favorite shows are wrapping up with their final seasons and or was not greenlit for a new season. But Pose hurts probably the most. I had so much emotion just pulled out of me watching Pose. It was nice to see Black LGBT folks on TV. And while not all of the moments were necessarily positive, it was really good to have that representation on screen, to see and have people's stories told in a way that was real and representative of those experiences. This is one of the few productions where actual QPOC, Q trans folks were actually hired to help produce and write and establish the show. I love Pose with all my heart, and I'm sad to see it go.
Diego, tell me what it meant to you.
I'm very sad to see it go also. And for me, it's sort of to have seen it come was so exciting. I knew that it was coming, sort of knew what it was going to be about. And a lot of it was from stuff that I lived through back in the day. And, even the New York culture at the time, I was around it a lot. Because even corporately, I still had community in New York. So for me, there are enough people my age or near it watching that experience things like two things that stand out that are different than Pose. One is something like Paris is Burning, which became such a centerpiece. I mean, I remember seeing it when it came out and went, oh my God, I remember this and it's real. And the other thing is, prior to that, every queer movie that every queer person went to, you went and saw two things happen in one movie. People fell in love and then somebody died. And it was dying because of the love they had. Pose is such a difference than that. It showed real life struggles, real life victories, a tremendous amount of connection among people who live through difficulty, but also celebrations. And some of those are intercultural as well as intra. So I'm sorry to see it go in many ways, but I know that it'll birth something else.
I hope that it does. I really hope that it does. And actually, that sort of brings us to that second part of the question, which is, do you think, and Diego, I want to start with you on this one. Do you think that it has done some significant work in centering trans and non-binary actors? Do you think that maybe it sort of was not that we needed a test case to prove that you in fact could pull these shows off, but some people were watching to see what would happen? Do you think it has changed the game for people?
So I'm going to say something unpopular. Yes, I do think it changed the role for people, but I'm also thinking that I don't want it to center only on trans or non-binary identities or people. And what I mean is I want our people who are LGBTQ plus, especially QPOC, to be able to do other things, like let them be Doogie Howser. Let our people have every role, because I lived through the generations where white people were painted so they could play Native Americans or Latinos in movies. So I want our people, yes, to be centered, but also to move forward beyond that.
I love that. I love that. The idea of just being who you are in these roles, that it doesn't actually matter that you are in fact trans or non-binary or anywhere sort of in the family, so to speak. So when talking about the show, the chairman of FX and the chairman for Walt Disney, who has FX, said that Pose really uplifted voices and stories that are underrepresented in media. But that actually brings up a conversation about gatekeepers in media. And who's allowing stories to move forward, who's making these decisions that something maybe won't be marketable. So Jamel, I want to start with you on this one, because I know we've talked about gatekeeping a bit in the past, but this is sort of a whole new twist and I think in some ways a bigger twist on the conversations that we've had. So what responsibilities do you think gatekeepers have to actors and to their stories? I mean, do you think that this, again, is one of those things that may have changed the way the game looks?
So we have talked about this, and we've seen this even over the last 20 or 30 years. The gatekeepers recycling material, doing reboots and part 2, 3, 4, 5 of franchises that should have never been rebooted. And I think one of the primary, hesitations they say is, well, we don't have proof of concept. Meanwhile, here's Pose giving you proof of concept, showing you that people want to hear these stories and see these kind of stories told on a screen and be able to connect with these kind of characters. So I think Pose itself, in conjunction with many other shows like I May Destroy You, shows that there's a market for this. And when you allow for QPOC, BIPOC people to tell their own stories, you can get it right.
I think that's a really good point. Diego, do you have anything that you would like to add on to that about responsibilities of gatekeepers? Because you've certainly seen a long evolution of that experience.
I do. Thank you so much for asking, Jean Marie. First of all, I think in the article that you had everybody look at, it kept talking about the word trust. And I think that the thing that gatekeepers have to do is have the courage to have trust in the stories and let new people's stories arise. Pose started out really strong, but it really kicked off when my baby niece went beyond just being an author and doing something phenomenal like directing and writing for this. It took it to a different level. And so the gatekeepers have to make room for people like Janet, but also others.
I agree with you. I agree. And I think sort of watching, and speaking of Janet Mock, just looking at sort of her trajectory and how much bigger it's become. And even what I noticed, and it made me really excited, just watching the credits for Pose was such a proof of who can be involved. You would just read the credits and think, I know them, or I know them, I've seen their work here, but it was only in a queer space. And here I am watching a real life mainstream show, and there it is. And that is kind of exciting, even as somebody who is not trans identified, to look at it and think, everyone's here for once. It's not just the same cast of characters. So there were so many stories that were told in Pose, and we obviously know that it's specifically talking about a specific period in time and a very specific piece of queer culture. So Diego, I actually want to start with you on this one. A lot of stories were told, but what kind of stories do we still need to hear? I mean, there has been some really, really good media that's come out lately, especially trans-related media, but what do you think people are missing?
Well, I'm going to tell a story that has more to do with Jamel's generation, and that is that, yes, darling, it's the lack of the living mentors through that period. We lost queer men, especially gay men, lost an entire generation of people who, frankly, a lot of lesbians nursed to their death, nursed to the end of their lives. That younger men did not, and others, men and other people, did not get the chance to have a connection with a whole generation of people. And so some of us, like myself, lived through, but a lot of people didn't. So I think one of the things that we still have to tell is what kind of stories can be elevated through the pain without all of the representation of the bodies that actually told those stories and lived those stories first.
I love that. And I feel like as I get older, I become more aware of who's around. That was exactly the right response, because I haven't aged is the correct answer. But as I get older, I look around and you notice fewer and fewer people are in the room. And I've been so incredibly lucky and privileged to have so many of my elders, you included, Diego, in my life. But that has certainly not been the experience for us. And, you know, growing up queer, where you're lucky if you have a role model, it becomes even more essential to be able to tell these stories. And some of these stories are unfortunately disappearing. Jamel, do you want to build on that at all, about some of the stories that we still need to hear?
I really want to just see just a bona fide love story. Like, I quite frequently, like, when we do see that love depicted on television, it's always thwarted by some kind of chaos. There's an HIV storyline, there's trauma, but like, that is a reality for a lot of people, but that is not everybody. And I would love to see examples of like what it means for two QPOC, just like people to be in love and to love each other, and to like give that example for, you know, the people that come after us. We really haven't seen that depicted. There's a few, you know, surprises here and there, but overall, like, it's not a thing.
When we have our own terrible rom-coms, I'm going to know that we totally arrived. Like when you were like, oh God, not another queer rom-com, that's when I know that we've arrived and we could like move on to another issue at that point. So there's one thing about trans that I think is about Pose, rather, with trans actors, that is really interesting. And that actually is, as we talk about how much visibility it gave people, how much it got conversation started, one of the very interesting, and I'll go so far as to say disturbing things, is that when we look at the awards the show has been nominated for, in spite of having a massive cast of trans and non-binary identified actors, none of them have been nominated or obviously won things like an Emmy. The only actor in the show who has actually been nominated and won an Emmy is Billy Porter, who is a gay man, however, is cisgender. So what do you think this actually says? And Diego, I want to start with you on this one, because you've certainly been in this space a long time. So what do you make of that? Oh, still mute?
God, it was the best thing I ever said. I really think it's fascinating at a time when we talk about nothing about us without us. And then so many things that are about us are without us. So I think it's great that someone, I mean, Billy Porter's phenomenal. So are so many others. And I mean, it's something I was mentioning to some friends that, you know, I am thrilled about yesterday's announcement regarding Dr. Rachel Levine, this historic announcement. And so many of the quotes that were given about how great this was did not come from trans people. The voices were relatively not. And so it has an opportunity for integrity to extend itself a little farther, I think.
And Jamel, thank you. And Jamel, other thoughts on that?
So we were talking a little bit about this before we got started, but the reach of Pose has been so like just monumental. Like, I literally cannot believe that like this show is not getting awards. And so I brought it up in the capacity of the Wades. And so we saw how transformative the show has been specifically for Dwyane Wade and his family in, working with Zaya Wade and just allowing for her to be herself and watching her and helping her go through her transformation. But like, that's just one really prime big example of, how this show has, here's the tweet or the screenshot for folks that haven't seen it, but continuously people are talking about this show and how it's impacted them and how it's changed their views. We love the production, we love the characters, but when it's time to, give those credentials and those awards, there's crickets. And that's extremely problematic. Like, just it makes me so bad.
We're looking at a comment from Leticia. If we're going to talk awards, we have to talk about the fact that awards are trash. We'll just create our own. It's how we get things done these days. I think it's very interesting. And Jamel, could you just give people a little bit of context for the Dwyane Wade tweet? Because I think that was really interesting and not everybody necessarily knows that.
Yeah, so there's a show on HBO that have like rappers and basketball players talking about pop culture and like current events or whatever. And one of the most recent episodes, Dwyane Wade is talking about how quintessential and important watching Pose was to, one, understanding the realities for LGBT people, understanding the negative consequences of disengaging from your child and kicking your child out, from the home and or not being supportive. And then also watching the show and gaining a better, understanding of how he and Gabrielle Union can work together as a family to support, their daughter, Zaya Wade. And so there was rich conversation there, but then some of the actors from Pose saw that interview, and then one of them, Ryan Jamal Swain, took a screen cap and shared this. So it was just talking about how important it was to his own personal journey as a straight person supporting a young person, but also Zaya watching the show and seeing like, oh my gosh, like this could have been my life, but my parents are supporting me, and now I have an opportunity to live differently.
I think anytime people start to kind of poo-poo pop culture, I think I love pointing to things like that and talking about what a lifeline, well-done cultural pieces, even what we're watching on television can be for some people. So this whole conversation gets us into moving into next week because on next Wednesday, on the 31st, it will be the Trans Day of Visibility. And this is a day that we always encourage our allies to start creating spaces for people, elevating stories. So Diego, I want to start with you on this one. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that you think, because so many people watching are allies to people who are trans and non-binary. What are some of those ways that every single day around the year, people can be helping create spaces, all of our well-meaning cisgender allies?
Well, I'm going to say this about that, and maybe I'll have a job tomorrow and maybe not. But I honestly think that one of the best opportunities for people to experience is to experience. And so what I hope is that our allies join Trans Day of Visibility events that trans people and non-binary people are creating, so they actually learn the language and the culture before saying, why won't people come to my house and eat my meal that isn't what they normally eat? Given that a lot of PFLAGers have actually already deeply embedded themselves inside with trans community and non-binary people, I think it's wonderful when the space is already created to be inclusive. So I think PFLAG for everyone is a place you can always go and feel welcome. So I think the events can happen every day. An event around TDOV is a moment, any moment, when a trans person needs support, whether it's visible just to one person or to everyone. So I feel like that visibility means being seen, and it doesn't take 1 million people to do that. So I feel like PFLAG Family Love is TDOV every year, every day.
I love it. 365 days of TDOV, of PFLAG is what our whole goal is. I really love that. I love that the reminder is that being an ally means being an ally every single day, not just the day that has the ceremony and the names on it. So Jamel, could you talk a little bit about that too? Because again, you're working with people in our chapter network. You're talking to a lot of different people. What do you think are some of the ways that you've seen people starting to show up And again, especially understand that you and Diego are coming from different places, different generations. What is it looking like for you?
For me, I am going to invoke the great Beyonce. Y'all have to get in formation. Like, it's time to use your privilege, use your power to amplify the voices of trans folk who can speak for themselves. Give them the microphone, give them a pedestal to step up and share, the things that they need to share. And when it's time to protect yourself and put that arm out and, guard them, do so. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things as an ally that you can do for trans folks. And give them your money, pay them, please.
Pay people for what they do.
Give them money.
People work for free. Diego, I want to ask you a specific question as we talk about creating space and creating ally spaces or more inclusive spaces for trans folks. There is a lot of conversation about, as we call it in what we do, performative justice. Allies who are kind of showing up and putting the sticker and the pin on and not really doing the deep dive. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, what it looks like, and I think how people should be avoiding it? Because I think you brought up a really interesting point that yesterday we heard from a lot of cisgender people talking about a transgender person. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think people get very interested in what is the right way to ally.
Well, first I want to say that the words performative justice are really privileged words. I mean, if you say it to people who really need it, we wouldn't know what you're talking about. Performative justice is waking up and having a meal to eat for some of us. So I'm performing because I can find food. I honestly feel like, we're in a great place because of the PFLAG network. I think that some folks who just put a pin on and maybe go to a parade are also those who pick up the phone and save a life. And I don't want to undervalue that just because you see someone cheering and chanting doesn't mean that they're not doing the hard work. So I would ask people to hold off judging what you think you're looking at and really give the person the something of doubt, whatever that word is.
The benefit of the doubt.
Thank you. I'm like, what's that word?
Three of us would get it eventually.
Thank you. ESL. Here we go. So it's giving them the benefit of the doubt, the trusting that just because they're holding a pom-pom doesn't mean they're not also holding a soup ladle when someone needs food.
And Janelle, any sort of observations on that? Because I know that we've kind of gotten into this space before too. Any thoughts about how you would address it if you saw somebody doing something that you thought was a little bit less than surface activism?
That's difficult. Me as a PFLAG staff member would have a conversation, educate. Me as a autonomous person would probably confront them and have a deeper conversation, maybe in a different way.
So, you're getting a lot of agreement, by the way. I think we have officially hit a nerve here with this conversation. So, as we start looking at our post-pose world, I think it's interesting to think about what comes next. So, Jamal, what else have you sort of seen out there that you think people who have been watching Pose might want to start paying attention to? Or are there any conversations about things coming up that you think people should be paying attention to?
Oh man, that's tough. I feel like there are a lot of like LGBT stories that are kind of like forming in the ether. But I'm unsure, Jean Marie. I don't know what the next big thing is going to be, especially since like we're in this unusual time and things aren't necessarily happening in the way that they normally do. If I had to take a guess, I think we're going to see a lot more original content being created by people themselves. I'm imagining a lot of stuff via YouTube or Vimeo or people creating their own things and, finding, different outlets to like make them happen. Today, I was just reading that Issa Rae, who started on YouTube, now has an 8-figure deal with Warner. Like, she started an empire by creating material from herself and making these fully realized characters and getting people on board that way. I would not be surprised if we continue to see people following that in her footsteps.
Thank you. And now I'm going to throw in a question that I absolutely did not plan on throwing in. And Diego, this one is coming at you because we actually have time. And while we love talking about entertainment, We also really super love making sure that we are at the same time while we're enjoying our TV, doing things that are actually ensuring equality and access for everybody. So while we are here, Diego, would you quickly talk about how people who seek to be trans allies might also learn more and do a little bit on the Equality Act, because this is all part and parcel of the same thing.
Absolutely. Thank
I'm
you.
making it political. I'm making it political.
It's not political, it's life-saving. And the Equality Act is actually really important to everyone because it includes not only LGBTQ people, but also all women who are not included in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 64, as well as people who are in religious minorities. And it really is all about making sure that everyone has equal access to non-discrimination, and actually that is implemented, that people are not discriminated against. What everyone can do is make sure right now that you're reaching out to your senators. I know that people in Washington, D.C., I accept myself from that because I believe that in the power of the zip code. There is no one more important than a constituent. The person who can vote someone in or out of office is who matters the most. Use us with PFLAG, and we're going to help you because we're going to have a lobby day on April 21st. We hope you'll participate. Senators need to hear every story, and I think they can be framed in several ways. One is to say what your experience is for yourself and your family, what your hopes are, and also what your fears are. Let them know what you might be missing if there's not the Equality Act, and how no matter where you live and where you play and where you go to school, as we heard from the witness in the hearing in the Senate last week, from our wonderful teenage trans girl, in addition to our witness, Dr. Edith Guffey, talking about populations that are left behind, families that are left out if we don't have the Equality Act. So please reach your senators. Don't hesitate. We have our own wonderful materials for you to use. The chapter engagement coordinators are ready to rock with you. So please reach out and let us be part of the family.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question that I did not warn anybody we were actually going to do. But I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, if you were horrified by some of the experiences you saw that people went through on Pose, if you're horrified by seeing what's happening in the news, somebody in the chat just mentioned there's about 84 bills pending right now in the states that affect LGBT and specifically trans kids. There is a lot going out there. So really, if you want to honor the legacy of Pose and you want to make that into something real, I think taking action politically right now is exactly how to do it. And I know we normally don't cross those two conversations, but I think sometimes there are opportunities to cross those conversations. I'm going to quickly check in with Liz and see if there is anything that Liz wants to bring in. I don't know if she needs to pop in back with us.
I am popping back up in with you. There's been a lot of conversations going on. I was particularly really into the conversation about whether this could happen. Perhaps maybe Elliot instead of Ellen, we'll have Elliot, and the response that made me laugh. Sorry, I had to. But yeah, I mean, I think about things like Umbrella Academy, right? You know, Elliot Page in that show was continuing their role on that show, and the producers were all in on that, and how that show will now be trans inclusive simply by virtue of the fact that they have a trans actor and what that will bring to the show, and they didn't blink, and I kind of love that.
It isn't, but you do have to recognize it's also not a person of color, and so I mean, it's a lens that some of us actually have to look at and say, "Wow, isn't that different?"
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I'll just personally bring up that I live in California, and I have to bring it up. I had an opportunity to see MJ Rodriguez from Pose take on the role of Audrey in Little Shop of Horrors at Pasadena Playhouse, and it was possibly one of the most moving performances I've ever seen. My endless sadness that they didn't capture it and record it. It was she was spectacular.
You know why she's so spectacular? New Jersey.
Oh,
New Jersey.
That could be it.
I mean, haven't we figured this out here? Well, we are just about at time again. I want to thank you, Diego and Jamel, we always have such a good time. Thank you both for jumping in and having the conversation with me. It is always so much fun. I know you'll both be back. Thank you. And Liz, thank you again for getting us started and keeping everything rolling. I always appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that gets us to the end of another show, the last show of our first season. So join us next week for season 2. Of something to talk about. Same bad time, same bad channel. We've been saying the exact same thing since the beginning, which is to run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. And obviously keep wearing those masks and getting your vaccinations when you are eligible. Thank you for everybody who's been watching for the entire year. Thank you to those who have jumped in. We really appreciate you. It's made this a lot of fun. And hopefully we'll have some good shows coming up for you really soon, starting next week again. So until next week, put those masks on. Keep your social distancing and please continue to be kind. We'll see you again next week. Thanks, everybody.